So, hello, my name is Martin Faix. I'm the Vice Dean for International Relations here at the Faculty of Law of the Palacký University, and at the same time I'm Senior Lecturer in Public International Law here at the Department of International and European Law. And today with me is Dr. Martha Bradley from South Africa. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you so much.
And actually, I should not say welcome in terms of welcoming you, since you have been here now for 6 months.
Yes.
And you have the position of a researcher at the law faculty. So at the very beginning, I would like maybe to ask you to introduce briefly yourself, where you come from, what your career has been so far.
Perfect. As you heard, I'm Martha Bradley, and at the moment I'm a researcher. I'm in the last month or last 2 weeks of a position that I thoroughly enjoyed and gained so much from at Palacký University. My academic background is that I did my bachelor's degree, my master's degree in international air and space law, as well as my doctoral degree in international humanitarian law at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And then I did my second master's in maritime law at the University of Cape Town. But my real research interest is the law of non-international armed conflict, which brought me all the way from South Africa to the wonderful city of Olomouc and the Department of Public International and European Law at Palacký University. So that is how I came here after I saw advertisement specifically looking for research conducted in IHL. And I'm so fortunate because before I came here, I had no real interaction with the military, for instance. So I guess it was a long road of almost 10 or more years of study that brought me here, but I grew so much in the past 6 months. So I'm very fortunate to have made my way to the very charming Czech Republic.
That's good to hear. And basically, the point is also that we have, of course, visiting colleagues from abroad coming for teaching. The first interview which I conducted was with Professor Henny Stridham from the University of Johannesburg. And he was here for 2 weeks making an intensive course for our students. But your position is special since we didn't have a researcher for such a long time, for 6 months here yet. So you are the first one for such a long time. Well, it's actually not a long time, but for such a period of time. And so maybe I would like to know, or maybe you could give us an idea, what the researcher position actually brought to you in terms of what activities you conducted, what did you do? I mean, research is of course one part of that, but maybe what were the other activities you did in the 6 months here?
I will first focus on the research component, and then I will move on to other insightful conferences and so forth that I could engage in because of the research position itself. But I came to the Czech Republic in September to focus specifically on the law of non-international armed conflict, specifically customary international law applicable during non-international armed conflict and conflict classification. The benefit, because I have conducted research stays before, but for 2 months or 3 months, but really the benefit for me of having a 6-month stay is that 2 months is too brief to really engage in subject matter. Because of course, when you just get somewhere, you first have to get yourself orientated. Although I must say, all the places I visited, the international office at Palacký University is definitely the best. Everything was perfect even before my arrival. I had access to the library, I met all the staff, I knew exactly which professors could assist me, but it really benefited me to spend a longer amount of time in a certain place, not so that I could gather the information, but really read and have that solitude. I think it's very important when you conduct research that
not
you
to be disturbed, to just have a piece of time.
Just to have that time to really think, because otherwise you really summarize debates. You need that silence to really grapple and engage with the contents. And you can only do that if you have a writer's retreat. What I would call Olomouc, because it is a very historic and beautiful city, but also it has a good library, we have a good office, it's quiet enough for me to really focus and to take perhaps a nice stroll in the botanical garden also just to clear my mind and then focus on my research again. A big benefit to me is that you have very engaging and friendly international law professors. It is yourself who's an expert on IHL, which is very beneficial to me, because it's not often that you have the opportunity to really just sit down and talk about your research and get the view of someone else who is your senior. So that really helped me, that we could engage on topics. And then, of course, you have Pavel Buris and Andrei Swatchik. So there's a very good international law foundation. So it made the solitude, I could also have breaks from the solitude and really engage and get your views and discuss where I am, things that I read that I'm grappling with, just to gain that perspective once again.
Well, then I hope that actually the other activities which we offered to you were not too disturbing for you.
No,
because you were involved also in teaching.
Yes, no, definitely. It was, I guess the teaching was also beneficial to my research, because I am fresh out of my PhD, perhaps not so fresh anymore. But the fact that I had the opportunity to teach various components of IHL, also in relation to my research field, but it helped me to do other research, to rediscover certain parts of the law that I almost abandoned during the...
refresh just
Yeah,
some
so
basics.
it really helped me to refresh, and because you have Erasmus students from different countries and so forth.
How did you cope with this? Because this is usually quite a tough thing when you have a class with so many people coming from so many different countries.
I'm actually so thankful for that, because it helped me in the way that I write now. Because suddenly you have a different audience, because the students have different academic backgrounds, they're at different levels, and some of them have, English is not their first language, also, it's not mine, but it helps you to really consider how you present difficult concepts. For instance, command responsibility, how you should explain it so that the whole class can follow, to give the fundamentals, and then also to keep the really strong students engaged as well. So it influenced my writing. I think it actually benefited my writing, because I could think of the person reading the page, that it might be a final year law student or a more advanced person.
It makes you think about different perspectives.
How do you really present, how to be more nuanced, to also open their thoughts. So when you think about questioning them, or giving them things to thought about, you actually challenge yourself. So I think having a teaching component here was very beneficial, because it pushed me more. Because I really had to do my research, because you never know what the students will ask you. It is master's level. So I guess that I would say that the teaching was the verbalization or the oral part of my research. So I'm very glad, because I also received stimulating questions, and I could go back and engage even more in the topics.
That's very good. And another thing is that the faculty is particularly proud of being able to interconnect the theory and the practice. And this is something which we, I think, sort of managed also in the area of international law, in particular in the area of the law of armed conflict, the course which you have been teaching in the winter semester. And you participated in this practical, let's say, part, which is the Campera. How did you perceive this?
I think that Campera is probably, apart from the research visit, one of the academic highlights for me, because you can see that I'm not a member of the armed forces, unfortunately. And the most research that I do, or my experience, is basically desk-based research. So you try to envision what soldiers grapple with, but you cannot really imagine it correctly, as I found out, when you're actually on the ground. Because what makes, I think, IHL a little bit different than some of the more theoretical parts of international law is that a lot of it should be communicated to soldiers, to what they can and cannot do. And if they do not have a clear understanding, it opens them up to responsibility, or lives are lost. So it's a very practical side of the law. But so few academics or researchers ever get to see the real life implementation of the law. So for me, when I got to Campera, I was really surprised. I knew it would be realistic, but just to explain perhaps what Campera is academics and members of the armed forces, members of the Red Cross and the UNHCR goes on a weekend, and this year it was a simulation on the situation in Mali. And specifically in Mali, at the moment, there's a non-international armed conflict ongoing. And the Czech armed forces was later then deployed to Mali itself. So the simulation prepared almost the Czech armed forces for this deployment, in that students played refugees and so forth, and to see the responses, which is really the application of additional protocol 2. And I never envisioned the practical problems that you will be faced with as a commander when you decide, for instance, to let a refugee into the camp. Suddenly, when you see all these people in need, to disregard the emotion from the law, split-second decisions, it really impacted on me, because yes, you can write a 300-page thesis for an academic, but for a soldier, you need a one-pager or 2 or 3 lines. There's no time.
Exactly.
So I think that this is probably one of the only opportunities that I would have in my lifetime, or one of the only Palacký University in cooperation with the Charles University that gives people the opportunity to engage in simulation training. And it's so important, because suddenly the nuances becomes less important. You really learn to get to the point. You do not have time to think, this scholar said that, but that was the contrary position, and explain all of that to the soldier.
No theory. You have to put theory into practice.
You really have to know how to apply, what are the consequences, really know your work. I really take my hat off for military lawyers, because they have to make the split-second decisions.
And it's good that within this simulation, the students can actually get in touch and see how these things basically work. So they have a sense of reality also in this area of law, which for them very often seems really just as a theory, which they learn here at the faculty.
And I think then you also groom or attract the right caliber of student for future studies in IHL, because they will take practice into account. So I think that's very important to see that dimension of the law, because it is such a practical side.
That's exactly, you equip the students with skills which they can use, and which even will make them attractive more for the employers, for the market, for the labor market, and so on and so on.
And it really is about service. I think that that is such an important part, because you also put so many hours into Campera, because you really serve your community as researchers to engage in a project with the armed forces, because we get all these opportunities to study and so forth, but our impact is more limited if we're writing only in books. So I thought that simulation training it really encourages me on how I will approach my career.
Thank you. It's good to hear that, and this is something what the law faculty is trying to do, of course, in more areas or in more subjects, to interconnect with practice in order to show the students how important it actually is. So we have, of course, the legal clinics in many different areas of law, and so on and so on.
And of course, Campera also gave us the opportunity to afterwards debrief the soldiers, to hear their points of view on certain decisions that they made, hear our points of view, and also the students. So it really pushed you to employ your research into practice, and it was actually harder than I thought.
Good. And as a last thing which I would like to ask you is, I mean, 6 months in the Czech Republic before you came, it was certainly not a place you would know well. In old times, when you were looking at the maps, so the areas in territories which were unexplored, you always had written Hicks und Leones, here are lions. So you probably would not expect lions in the Czech Republic as such, but certainly there was a lot of questions what will expect you here. Especially if you move for 6 months. So maybe just as a last thing I wanted to ask is, how was your life here in the 6 months? How did you enjoy it?
I think that the 6 months went past too quickly, because I was so engaged and I was so happy that I didn't realize how time passed. It was a big decision when we first talked and when I applied for the position, because I am married, I have a family back in South Africa, but I had to weigh the pros and the cons. And what really attracted me was the opportunity to spend 6 months undisturbed away from any other engagements on my research, but also the simulation training. But I remember I asked you the first night, being from South Africa, if it's safe for a woman alone to travel all the way to Czech Republic. And it's probably, and I've been in many European countries, the US and so forth, it's probably the safest that I've ever felt. I really enjoy Czech culture, although the language is too difficult for me. But I must say that the Czech people are really warm. I have been communicating with only 2 Czech words in my toolbox, and I managed to order things at restaurants, to buy bus tickets. I really get along. So the linguistic obstacles isn't really an obstacle because people are warm and kind and they want to help you. So I don't think that language should be something that holds you back. Also at the faculty, everyone has a good, most people has an excellent command of English, our entire department. And the fact that we really have lovely colleagues. I must say that I have spent a lot of time on the road. I mean, you took us from Warsaw to Heidelberg. We've been to Auschwitz. We've really explored Europe, in a sense, to academic conferences and all these opportunities, because we have such warm colleagues that's inviting, that I can speak to. So I never got homesick, which is something that I have gotten in the past. And I must say that it really is affordable. So if you consider going somewhere for a research visit in the US and the rest of Europe, it might be difficult if you are from the third world or the developing world, as I am. But you really get value for your money in Czech Republic. And the food is too good. I gained like 8 kilos. Yes, the goulash and dumplings. I think that...
I tried to avoid the goulash question,
yes,
but you raised it.
I think I might have, some Czech in my bloodline, because I love the goulash. I love Olomouc because it is so historic, and the Trinity column, the Holy Trinity column, the astronomical clock, it really is a fairy tale town. You really feel like you are in Europe. It's the kind of splendor, but it's also very nice. I actually do not want to market Olomouc too much because it's such a gem and there's not too many tourists. And I shouldn't say that because actually I'm an academic tourist, I think, because it's quite enough that you can really enjoy and see and live. So for me, it became a home away from home. I even catch myself telling my husband, I'm on my way home. And he's like, what, you coming to South Africa? And I'm like, no, to my apartment.
Just your apartment.
Just my apartment. So you don't need a car. You really live very well on the funding that's available. And just something that I forgot to say, some highlights, if I may still, if time permits, that I didn't touch upon, is that within the research funding, I had the opportunity to visit some conferences. For instance, I went to the Max Planck in Heidelberg for a conference on intervention by invitation with top scholars like Sir Michael Wood, Anna Peters, and so forth. And it also allowed me to go to the Peace Palace. So if a researcher is hesitant that are there sufficient English books in the library in Olomouc, I must say that we have good libraries in South Africa, but all the commentaries, all the Oxford manuals, all the basics are in the international office. And then you also have a little bit of spending money, which allowed me to go to the Peace Palace Library in The Hague, where I could get everything else that I needed.
It's the place.
So there was never that I could not get access to research. In fact, I think if I was anywhere else, I wouldn't have the budget or the opportunity. Also because Czech Republic is so close to Germany, to the Netherlands. It's just close enough if there is something that you have to get at another university. And the librarian speaks perfect English upstairs, so that is not a hesitation. And then finally, just back to community outreach, something that really touched me that you do here as well, is that there's an outing to Auschwitz every year, which also has an impact on IHL, the Nuremberg tribunals and so forth. And I personally have never experienced this. And I think it's so powerful for academics to take students to Auschwitz and then to have lectures and discussions of the evolution of the law and the importance of what we do there. The same as with the exposure to Canberra, to really understand law or before real regulation at Auschwitz what happened, and the benefit when you also see Canberra. So I think the practical and the insight that you gain, you won't experience that anywhere else. I haven't. It's really a parcel, or there's so many different components of doing my research here, because there's practical experience, there's life experience that you would not get somewhere else if you're in a top-notch library sitting in solitude and you do not have the human interaction or the programs and other exposure that you really give your students.
I'm happy.
So for me, that's probably the most beneficial, is the exposure to historic places.
I'm happy to hear that you liked not only the place and that your life here was good in sense of being here, but that you felt here comfortable, and of course that it was a good professional experience. Of course, we are very keen to have other researchers here and continue the work.
So any researcher will benefit not only from, I must say, the infrastructure and the technology at this university is so far ahead that I almost needed a training course for all the wonderful facilities in the classrooms, the smart boards and all of that. But it's also the lecturers and the professors that creates this environment.
Makes you feel comfortable in professional and personal
way. To work with you, to work with Pavel, with Andre, I would really encourage someone to also come for that, because that's a big part of research, is engaging and grappling and thinking and having alike minds to push you even further.
Thank you, Marty. It was a great pleasure having you with us.
Thank you so much, Martin. I hope to be back. Yes.
And thank you also for being available today for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.